Hello and welcome back to another Giant Slayer TFT Synergies tier list video. Today our analysts will be ranking each synergy from S all the way down to the C tier for patch 11.22. This is the first trait tier list for set 6 and we have a few clarifications moving forward. First, augments make a huge difference in the strength and viability of traits. That makes it difficult to truly pinpoint the strongest compared to the weakest. As it stands, our way of ranking each synergy will be based on how well they do default in the meta, and then talk about what may or may not make them stronger in regards to augments. With all that said, keep in mind that practically all synergies are usable and have viable uses depending on the situation, so don't underrate a C tier synergy just because it's low ranked. With all that, let's go ahead and get started. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come. Be sure to also follow our Giant Slayer TFT social media pages. Alright, let's get back to the video. Kicking off our list, we have the S tier synergies, which are Academy, Mercenary, Transformer, Chemtech, Cuddly, and Socialite. These traits are doing the best in the meta currently, with solid baseline stats and augments that make them even stronger. At the top of the S tier, we have Academy. To no one's surprise, Academy is the best all-around trait in the current meta. The synergy just gives so many additional stats for Yone, which turns him into the strongest 4-cost carry. Lux also benefits from the increased AP, as well as specific Academy augments like Cram Session. Academy also houses one of the best 5-cost champions in the meta, a certain cat that we'll talk about later. But as it is, Academy certainly showcases why staying in school is so important. Next up is the money-making trait for set 6, Mercenary. Mercenary may not seem that powerful on paper, but in practice, it's a guaranteed way to boost your board's strength somewhat reliably. This is because either you're playing on a loss streak and hit the jackpot, which isn't difficult to do thanks to the strength of Mercenary champions, or you hit 5 Mercenary and passively gain a ton of value each round you win. Either way, Mercenary is one of the more surefire ways to top 4 as long as you either hit Mercenary 3 in Stage 2 or Mercenary 5 in Stage 3 with an Augment. Even in the late game, there's value in the synergy, but the fact that you can get so far ahead in the early stages of the game with just the base trait is a bit crazy. Oh, and Mercenary is insanely good for generating gold, especially with Gangplank 2 carry. Transformer, or Jace, is a late game powerhouse synergy thanks to the flexibility of being able to use Jace as a frontline DPS or a backline carry. Jace is easily one of the most contested late game champions and fits in with practically any composition, especially with the added utility of Enforcer. Chemtech is up in the S tier because of how fantastic both the champions are and the augments. Urgot can shred enemy champions, Mundo is a big beefy frontliner, and Victor not only adds a lot of AP damage, but also makes Urgot do more damage by lowering the armor of the enemies he auto-attacks. Augments really take this trait to the next level, particularly with Chemical Overload, because the Chemtech board naturally has a lot of high health units. Instant Injection is also quite good, specifically for ramping up Urgot right away in a fight. Definitely one of the strongest synergies, even if it's not providing as many raw stats as Academy does. Now we can talk about Cuddly, which is the cat we alluded to earlier, Yuumi. Yuumi, like Jace, is playable on any late game board. She provides a lot of utility between her shields and an ability that stuns multiple units over multiple seconds. And she's an Academy champion, see what I did there, which increases her value by a lot. And finally, in S tier, we have Socialite. It's debatable whether this should be in the S tier, but it's one of the most played splash synergies because one unit provides a 20% buff to your carry. Sure, it's not usable every game, but on average, in every lobby, at least 1 or 2 players will be utilizing the Socialite Hex. Not the most overpowered trait, but one of the most consistent. With that, we can move into the A tier synergies, which consist of Challenger, Clockwork, Twin Shot, Enchanter, Mutant, Arcanist, Bruiser, Glutton, and Yordle. These are all fantastic traits that generally pair well with the synergies in the S tier, making them an important part of the meta. At the top, we have Challenger. Challenger is just another stat boost for Yone, but also houses multiple champions that do well in the meta, such as Fiora, Kai'Sa, Camille, and Quinn. The thing about Challenger is how it can snowball a fight, as after one takedown, the units rush forward, eliminating any potential pathing issues. A simple to use trait with a lot of applications in the current meta. Clockwork is similar to Challenger as it's an attack speed stim, but it's the whole team and scales with how many augments are active. With just 2 Clockwork, you gain 25% attack speed with 3 augments. As far as splash traits go, this is certainly one of the better ones in set 6. 2 of the stronger damage dealers in the meta are Urgot and Jinx, both of which benefit from Twin Shot. Kog'Maw can also carry in specific scenarios, and of course there's Gangplank as well. There's also several augments like Sharpshooter that increase the value of twin shot carries. All around, twin shot is a solid trait. Enchanter is this set's mystic, but with the added benefit of increased healing and shielding. It can be a great splash trait, plus it can make for interesting scenarios where a board just won't die because of the increased utility. The only issue is when a lobby is mostly AD, but still, 2 enchanters are fairly easy to fit into most comps. One of the most unique traits of set 6 is Mutant. Mutants value vary heavily game to game because the mutations are never the same. There's a lot of volatility, especially with augments adding even more variants. But Mutants also has a lot of top tier champions, especially since it pairs well with Chemtech. Arcanist is a simple splash synergy most of the time since it's just a 20% boost to your board's ability power. Of course, adding more is certainly viable with Lux and Victor as potential carries, plus augments like Runic Shield make the synergy a lot more interesting. But as a baseline, it's mostly just a valuable splash trait. Bruiser is Brawler with a twist. Instead of just boosting the Bruiser champion's health, it also adds health to your other units. This makes it a lot more applicable beyond the early game, especially with several late game bruisers like Tahm Kench and Mundo. It's a fantastic synergy that fits into a lot of comps. Speaking of Tahm Kench, up next is Glutton. Glutton is quite unique because the player must sacrifice a unit to feed Tahm Kench, giving him additional stats. But that does mean the longer you have the Kench, the more powerful he becomes. Certainly don't bench the Kench, as you must uninhibit the Ribbit to make your board stronger. And the last A-tier synergy is Yordle. Yordles can be awful, but they can also be amazing for generating gold. What they aren't is a consistent viable composition because relying on 3-starring 6 champions is a bit much. That said, if you want to use Yordle to make gold, great. It is worth it. But a full-on Yordle comp is a bit sketchy, so don't overcommit to it unless you're getting really lucky. Onto our B-tier synergies, which are Scrap, Innovator, Assassin, Enforcer, Sister, Bodyguard, Protector, Syndicate, and Scholar. Overall, all these synergies are viable in the meta, but aren't quite as consistent as the synergies in the higher tiers. Scrap sits atop the B tier, and it has the potential to go further if you have the augments for it. For example, hitting Junkyard on 1-4? Amazing. Getting 6 Scrap with an early emblem? Fantastic. But as a baseline synergy, Scrap and Innovator is mainly an early game focused synergy. And it does that job well, just once the game goes past stage 3, the effectiveness of the trait diminishes every round. We just mentioned it, as up next is Innovator. Innovator, along with Scrap, can be used for possibly the strongest early game composition. But past that, Innovator will struggle, except when you're able to play 7 Innovators, though even then you'll likely get outscaled despite having a dragon with scales. Assassins are in an awkward spot because sometimes they do really well and other times they fall flat. Part of that is augments like Smoke Bomb or Cutthroat, but the reality is most games you do need a Kali to scale well, and not hitting a Kali 2 really hurts your board. Definitely a viable trait, but the lack of consistency keeps it down in the B tier. We considered putting Enforcer higher on the list because it is a common mid to late game trait, and disabling a unit that you can still attack is quite nice. But the issue is, fitting in 4 Enforcer is not usually doable without augments, and only disabling 1 unit for a limited duration, while useful, isn't that powerful. We for sure recommend using the synergy, especially because of Jace, but it may need a few tweaks to earn a higher place on the list. Sister, in theory, is great. It buffs Vi in a unique way and gives Jinx more carry potential. But Jinx is more about doing a giant AoE, and Vi isn't really a carry except in rare situations. It's not a bad trait by any means, but it's not that amazing either. Unfortunately, Bodyguard suffers from being a bit too niche. Just armor can be great for frontline, but committing more than 2 spaces on your board to gain armor for just those champions is a bit much. Sure, bodyguards have some specific uses with the taunt, but on average, Bodyguard is a bit lacking. That said, Braum is amazing, and Leona is an academy champion, so having a few bodyguards in a composition isn't all that uncommon. Protector has a more unique design than Bodyguard, but the lack of champions really hurts its viability. Plus, 3 of those champions are low-cost units, leaving a sizable gap between having 2 and 4 Protectors. Ideally, it should be an early game synergy, but requiring either Scion or an emblem does hurt it. That said, reroll Protector can do well, and Scion carry isn't unheard of, so Protector protects itself from going down into the C tier. Syndicate is in a similar place as Protector in that it houses a lot of low-cost champions. That means early on, Syndicate is not bad, especially since hitting 5 of the trait isn't difficult. It can be a good buff for Shaco and gives Darius additional defense. But without a Kali or re-rolling for 3-star champions, Syndicate just isn't that amazing. But augments do make this synergy significantly better, as Payday can generate a decent amount of gold for you, and All for One adds scaling during combat rounds. At the bottom of the B tier, we have Scholar. Scholar provides a lot of utility with passive mana generation, but it can be tricky to splash it into a comp. Useful, but just not that impactful compared to some of the other splash synergies in the current meta. Finally, we're ending with the C tier synergies, which are Sniper, Imperial, Colossus, and Yordle Lord. While these traits are viable, they aren't amazing, and most of the time rely heavily on augments to do well. Up first is Sniper, which, in general, is kind of a fake trait. Yes, it does add damage, but it's rare to ever use more than 2 Sniper, and as the fight goes on, the bonus damage fluctuates too much to always matter. With that said, Sniper's Nest does improve the synergy drastically, but since that's not an option every game, we're comfortable with the C tier ranking. Imperial has multiple carries, but is really not that good, at least in the default version. Especially because 5 Imperial isn't possible without an emblem or augment. In theory, Imperial should be strong, but in practice, it isn't. Augments do help, but for the time being, it's safe to say that you can skip out on ever using this trait, except in niche situations. Colossus is such a cool trait, but gosh is it not that great, at least in its current form. Having giant-sized champions that are stronger baseline is neat, but is it really worth 2 spots on the board? Plus, they don't even gain the 25% damage reduction unless you have 2 of them, which is 4 slots for 2 units. Champions aren't even bad, it's just such a difficult choice to lose 1 slot on your board for a unit that isn't even drastically stronger than having 2. And the last synergy is Yordle Lord. It's debatable if this should even be on the list, but it's technically a playable synergy. We have it at the very bottom because, well, it's a bit of a meme, right? You have to 3-star all 6 Yordles to even begin finding Vygar, and honestly, Vygar isn't even that strong for how convoluted the process is to gain him. It's definitely a joke trait, but maybe it'll be a viable option in the future with either buffs to Vygar or Yordles. That's all we have for today's tier list video. Honestly, it's amazing how well balanced the first patch of Set 6 is. Normally when a new set releases, there's a huge gap in power between the upper tier and lower tier synergies, but in Gizmos and Gadgets, that's not the case. Almost every trait is playable and powerful in the right situation, especially due to the augment system. So hats off to the balance team, they've done a fantastic job. Let us know in the comments section below which synergy is your favorite so far in Set 6. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe. Here's your Giant Slayer TFT videos.